Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on the world of cowboy stories, we ride the stories of the West, campfire truths, trail dust memories, saloon whispers. Gritty humans, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The Blue Canary never went quiet, not even when a girl was dragged onto its cracked stage. The lamp above the piano hummed with a sick blue light. Smoke curled over the heads of ranch hands and card cheats over hats slick with sweat over a floor sticky with beer and spit. Lila Brooks stood in the center with a rope burn at her wrist and dust on her lips. Her uncle Silas Beck raised her arm like she was tack he meant to trade. "Debt is debt," Silas said. His voice carried through the piano's broken chords. "She is clean, she is young, she works." Laughter came easy to this room. Someone whistled. Someone slapped a table. Delia Hart, who owned the place, watched from behind the bar with a mouth set like a blade. She poured whiskey without missing. "Start at 10, Silas called. 10 silver, and you get yourself a wife who will not talk back." A ranch hand snorted. "I already got a mule." 5, Silas said. His jaw twitched. The knuckles on his free hand went white around his glass. He shook Lila's wrist when she tried to pull away. She flinched and swallowed whatever sound wanted out. Nobody moved, nobody lifted a hand. In the corner, a man rose from a chair deep in shadow. Rowan Cade, hat low coat, dark with years of sun. He smelled of clean sweat and pine pitch, not gin. He did not clear his throat or make a speech. He stepped to the bar and set down 3 Liberty $half. The coins touched wood and sang bright in the smoke, 3 clear notes that cut through the filth like a bell on Sunday. Silas stared. 3 you mock me. Rowan looked at Lila's hands, not her face. They shook fingers pressed tight to keep from showing it. "She leaves now," he said. 3 is an insult, Silas said. 3 says she is worth less than a saddle blanket. 3 buys her name, Rowan said, and only Delia heard the second half that stayed in his throat. Delia's eyes flicked to the coins, then to Lila, then back to Rowan's steady hands. She gave the smallest nod a person could give. The room liked the sound of its own laughter. "Cade, you buying yourself a ghost?" someone called. "She looks like she faints in daylight." Rowan did not answer. He waited. Silas's eyes moved from the coins to the door to the faces. He could follow money when it walked. "Sold," Silas barked. He snatched the silver and held out an open palm as if the room owed him applause. No refund. Delia's mouth tightened. Sheriff Maddox Hale leaned in the doorway and drank his coffee black. He did not smile, did not touch his badge. He watched the way Rowan reached for his coat and how he put it over the girl's shoulders the way a man covers a lantern in wind. Lila's breath caught when the coat settled. It was heavy-smelled like leather and wood smoke, a smell that said trees and rain, and not the dark tongue of gin. Her uncle's fingers left her wrist. She rubbed the skin, then hid the bruise under the coat's cuff. "Come," Rowan said, "only that." His voice was low and even, the kind that did not fight with a room. Silas leaned in close enough for Lila to taste his sour breath. "Keep your head up," he hissed. "A man pays more if you do not cry." Her throat closed. She kept her eyes on the floorboards, the ones with the boot heels worn into them like old tracks. They stepped into the street, and the night took the smoke from their clothes. The air in Copper Bend carried iron and dry sage. A train whistle floated across from the far line where the rails cut the valley. Women on porches pretended to count clothespins and watched. The wind pushed grit along the boards and rattled a sign with a loose nail. Sheriff Hale came out only far enough to let the doors curse back and forth on their hinges. He touched the brim of his hat with 2 fingers. "Evening, Cade. Evening, miss." Rowan's chin dipped once. Lila did not speak. The sheriff's gaze cut to the Blue Canary window where Silas's shape moved like a storm cloud. He let them pass. He had learned which moments needed a hand and which needed room. Rowan's mare, a chestnut with a white sock, waited at the trough. The windmill at the end of the lane turned and squeaked in small, tired sounds. Rowan checked the cinch, then cupped his hands. "Foot in," he said. Lila set her boot into his grip. He lifted without strain. She settled on the saddle and held the horn with both hands. Rowan swung up behind her. He did not press close, only enough to take the reins and let the mare feel his weight. "Hold this," he said, and laid the end of the blanket over her thighs. "It is a long ride up." She nodded. "You do not have to take me," she said. The words were small thin in the open air. "I am taking you home," Rowan said. The word snagged in her chest. She looked back down the street. Behind the windows, the town rearranged itself into a new story. On the Blue Canary's second floor, a curtain moved, then stilled. Lila's uncle had always taught her that rooms could own you. The coat held its weight. She pulled it closer. They rode out past the rail spur and the corrals, past the livery where a lantern swung on a hook and made gold circles on rough dirt, past the church. 3 steps up, a bell rope hung slack beside the door. The night was big enough to swallow words. Hooves thudded soft in the dust. The mare's ears pricked at the cry of a coyote on the far ridge. The air cooled the deeper they went, the scent of pinon sap and crushed sage rising with the slope. At the windmill, north of town, water clanked up and fell back in a tin rhythm. Rowan pulled the mare to a stop. He slid down and put his palm to Lila's ankle. "Foot," he said. She gave it. He lowered her with care as if she might shatter if she slipped. "Drink," he said. She knelt and cupped the water. It was cold and faintly metallic, a clean taste after whiskey stink. Her hands shook and the surface broke in ripples that caught moonlight. Rowan tied a blanket to the saddle tighter. He glanced at the sky the way a person checks for what might come even when there are no clouds. He saw the way Lila watched his hands like she was waiting for the part where kindness turns into something with teeth. "The door in my cabin locks from the inside," he said. "You will have the key." He said it like an inventory item, like a feed count, like a fact that did not ask trust, but left space for it. Lila looked at his profile. The scar along his jaw caught light. She had learned to measure men by the volume of their voices. Rowan's quiet did not sit on the room like a boot on a bird. It stood beside it. "Why me?" she said, then stopped, ashamed of how naked the question sounded. Rowan did not answer right away. The windmill creaked. The mare flicked flies. Far off, a train wheel hit a joint in the track and sent up a single metallic knock. "Because you needed a person," he said, "not a price." He gave the reins a small click. "Mount up." They climbed the slope toward Cinder Mesa. Below, Copper Bend gathered its lights like coins in a shallow pan. The river darkened and bent away toward the low country, no shine on it tonight. Lila's knees pressed against the saddle. Her body remembered how to stay on a horse. It had not forgotten everything yet. She looked down at the coat again, at the stitching done by a patient hand. The inside pocket held a little weight. She found it with her fingers through wool, something square and stiff. She took her hand away. There were rooms inside a person that you did not enter without being asked. They reached the switchback that cut through a seam of black rock. The mesa rose like a shoulder. The wind out of the north found them there. It brought the smell of rain from so far away it could have been a lie. She felt him breathe behind her, slow and even. It matched the mare's stride. Back in town, the Blue Canary's window flooded with lamplight. Silas leaned on the sill with his glass and looked at the silver coins in his hand, as if they might multiply if he stared long enough. He let the bottom fall heavy on the wood. His mouth twisted. In the street, a rider slid out of the dark and touched heels to a narrow mare. He did not go after the pair climbing for the mesa. He turned the other way and headed for the telegraph office at the depot, where the key waited with its dry click, and the wire would carry a story faster than any horse. The windmill at the edge of town turned and squeaked. The bell rope at the church door lifted once and settled. Rowan's cabin waited where the rock thinned and the juniper began. The place was small and straight, a porch rail rubbed smooth by weather, a single window. Smoke rose pale out of a short pipe, then lost itself to the sky. He swung down and steadied the mare. Lila climbed off and felt the ground tilt under her boots. It was quiet enough up here that she could hear the mare breathe. Rowan unlatched the door and stood aside. "Go in," he said. The cabin held the smell of pine sap iron stove-clean ash. A bed stood along the far wall with a quilt that had been mended at the corners. A chair faced the hearth. On a shelf, a wooden horse no bigger than a hand waited in dust. A frame lay face down beside it. Someone had set it that way on purpose. "You take the bed," Rowan said. "I will sit the chair." Lila kept her hands together so he could not see them shake. "I can take the floor," she said. "You will not." He opened a tin on the table. Bread and a small wedge of cheese. He put a tin cup near the pump at the sink and poured water until it ran clean. Then he stepped back so she could pass between him and the table without brushing his sleeve. He held up a small brass key. "The door locks from the inside. This is yours." She took it and felt its weight. Keys in her life had only belonged to other people. The little brass piece lay on her palm and made it real that this room could be closed by her hand. She slid it into the pocket of the coat and did not take the coat off. Rowan set his hat on a peg and stood with his back to the fire until it warmed, then dragged the chair to the hearth. "Sleep," he said. "Morning comes early up here." Lila set her boots side by side and lay on the quilt with the coat still over her. The stove ticked as its heat settled. Outside, the wind played the porch step. She closed her eyes and listened. The sound she feared did not come. No foot stepped quick with anger. No hand rattled the knob. His breathing near the chair was slow and steady, and it filled the room with a kind of order she did not know how to name. She woke while the window was still gray. Rowan had gone. The stove held coals. On the table sat a tin plate with cornbread and honey in a chipped saucer. She ate without appetite, and still went hungry, because hunger had never lived only in the stomach. When she stepped outside, Rowan was down near a simple fence hammer in hand, sleeves rolled. The air cut clean. A meadowlark called from a post and then flew. "Can I help?" Lila asked. He looked at the nails in his palm and then at her hands. "Pass me those square nails," he said, "and keep your fingers out of the swing." She did. He worked without waste. The rail he set was straight. When she wiped a bit of pitch off the edge with her sleeve, he stopped not to scold, but because he had seen that reflex before. He set the hammer head down and let the quiet stand. They went to the creek that cut through a seam of grass below the cabin. He filled 2 buckets and carried them one in each hand. She reached for one, and he let her take it. The handle bit her fingers, but she did not let it show. At the door, he took the bucket back with the same care he had used the night before when he lifted her from the horse. While she swept, a moth rose from under the bed and battered at the window. Dust turned to light in the sun. Her broom touched the shelf and made the frame shift a little. She righted it without looking under and found the wooden horse with her other hand. It was smooth in the places someone had touched it most. She put it back exactly where it had been. Near noon, a knock sounded on the door, sharp then patient. Rowan opened it partway. Sheriff Maddox Hale stood there with his hat in his hand, boots dusted white to the ankle. He kept his eyes level, not roaming. Lila moved to the side, and he saw where she had gone and where she had not. "Morning," the sheriff said. "I came to check the road, and to say a thing plain." Rowan did not ask him in. The sheriff did not step over the sill. Some men knew where lines were drawn. "Silas is loud in the Blue Canary," Maddox said. "Says what he says, that you took a thing, that he wants it back." Rowan's jaw set. He sold his kin. Maddox nodded once, as if to mark a fact in a ledger. "I know the truth, but folks like a story they can slap on a table. They will pass it along by evening without caring where it came from." Lila folded her hands until the knuckles hurt. "If he comes here," she asked, and the word stuck to her teeth. "I am not here to scare you," the sheriff said. He tipped his hat a small inch toward her, a gesture more careful than a bow. "I am here to let you know I am watching, and that I will read the law the way it is written. That is all." Rowan nodded. "Thank you." The sheriff put his hat back on and left the same number of steps he came. The rest of the day ran on rails. Rowan fixed what could be fixed. Lila cleaned what could be cleaned. When she carried kindling across the room, Rowan turned away and looked into the fire as if it held a piece of map he needed to read. He never reached for what was not his. He said little, and he meant it. Toward afternoon, he brought a saddle in and set it on a stand to oil the leather. The room filled with the smell of tallow and hide a soft smell that covered the memory of smoke. Lila's shoulders dropped and found a place to rest between her neck and the quilt. She did not know they could do that. "I should go into town," Rowan said. "We need salt and flour." "I will go," Lila said. The word surprised both of them. Rowan looked up. "You can wait until tomorrow and I will ride with you." "If I always wait," she said, "someone will say I am locked on your hook." Rowan set the oil rag down. He studied her face not to read it, but to make sure she was ready for what would look back at her from other faces. "Hold your chin steady," he said. "Come back before the light turns." She took the mare on the road down off the mesa. Dust rose around the hooves and fell. The town was a handful of buildings with their backs to the river and their eyes on the tracks. As she reached the first porch, women paused with their baskets, then looked past her as if a cloud had crossed the sun. Men at the blacksmiths leaned on the jamb and let their mouths tilt. She felt their regard like grit in the shoe. She kept going. May Whitlock stood in the door of her shop with a spool of blue thread in her hand and a smile she did not hide. "You look like a girl who could use a flower," she said, and held out a small bunch of yellow blooms wrapped in paper. Lila took them and smelled summer. "I have no coin for that," she said. May waved it away. "Folks pay me every day by not making me listen to their foolishness." Her eyes flicked past Lila to a pair of women who were already whispering behind their hands. "Keep your eyes on the sky when they start their hen talk. It is prettier." Lila bought flour and salt at the general store. The keeper counted the coin without a word and slid the bag across. When she stepped back into the street, the piano at the Blue Canary sent a stale tune out the open door. A man laughed. Silas Beck's voice rose from inside and carried like a cracked bell. "She was mine to trade," he said. "He stole her from me." Something in Lila's spine bristled. She did not step toward the door. She did not step away. She set the flour bag on her hip like a child and walked to her mare. Sheriff Hale's shape showed near the edge of the saloon window. He did not go in. He had the look of a man who could pull fire out of a room by waiting it to death. On the way out of town, a coyote-colored dog followed Lila at a distance. She whistled once, and it stopped head tilted. She broke a corner off a biscuit and set it on the road. The dog crept up and took it with its teeth showing in fear, then backed away. It came all the way to the first switchback and lay down in the shadow of a rock when she started up the grade. Evening softened the edges of the land as she climbed. The rails below turned to a dark wire in the dust. The church rope hung straight and still. She found herself holding the reins the way Rowan had, with the same quiet in her hands. When she reached the porch, the dog trotted up the last rise and settled under the steps with a sigh. When Rowan came out, it pressed close to the joist and did not let him near. "Looks like you brought home a shadow," Rowan said. "It followed me," Lila said. "It can leave when it wants." Rowan nodded, like anyone else. She set the flour on the table. He put water on for coffee and handed her a clean cup. They sat and did not fill the quiet with words. The cabin held 3 sounds: water beginning to shift toward a boil, the slow swing of the porch hook in the wind, the soft scrape of paws as the dog settled again. Rowan reached for his coat on the peg and hung Lila's beside it on the same hook. He had not meant to make a ceremony of it. He did not look to see if she noticed. She did. The 2 coats touched and stayed. Later she stepped outside and leaned on the rail and let the air cool her face. The far horizon had gone a darker blue. On the lip of the mesa to the south, a single shape stood against the last light and then disappeared. The wind carried the smell of rain that might be far or might be near. She could not tell. The windmill at the edge of the clearing turned and squeaked as if it remembered a story it had not told yet. The dog under the steps raised its head and listened, then put its muzzle back on its paws. Lila watched until the last color left the rocks. Inside, Rowan set another piece of wood on the fire and shut the stove door with a quiet hand. Morning came soft and pale. The mesa held its breath and let the light creep in slow. Lila woke to the smell of coffee and the quiet scrape of a chair. Rowan had left a note on the table, a single line in a clean hand that did not waste ink. "Back soon." She touched the paper, then folded it once and slid it into the pocket where the brass key already sat. The dog under the steps lifted its head when she opened the door. It wagged once in a way that barely moved its tail. Lila crouched and showed an open palm. The dog smelled the air near her fingers, then rested its muzzle on the step again. The wind carried the faint tang of iron from the river and the resin of juniper warming in the sun. Rowan came up from the corral with a coil of rope over his shoulder. He looked at her boots, then at the road that cut down toward the town. She understood what he was asking without a word. "I will be quick," she said. "We are low on quinine and I need thread." He nodded. "Take the mare that knows the road." She rode out with the cool still on her face. The windmill at the edge of the clearing turned slow and spoke its small language of creaks. When she reached the switchback, she looked back once. The cabin sat square against the sky, a box of clean lines. Rowan raised his hand and then turned toward the fence. Copperbend met her with the clatter of a wagon and the tin click of the telegraph key. Men salted the street with tobacco and stories. Women held their voices in and let their eyes work. Lila kept to the shade of the buildings. The doctor's office stood near the far end where the road sloped toward the wash. Inside, glass jars lined the shelves like soldiers. Carbolic hung in the air. Dr. Abram Stone came out of a back room drying his hands. He squinted a little to bring her into focus, then gave a small nod like he had been expecting someone and did not mind that it was her. "What do you need?" he asked. "Quinine," Lila said. "And thread, sturdy if you have it." He pulled a bottle from a high shelf and a card of thick thread from a drawer. He set them on the counter and pushed his spectacles up with a knuckle. "You are the young woman on the mesa." Her throat touched the word and then let it pass. "I am." "Mr. Cade has not been in town much these years," the doctor said. His voice did not ask for gossip. It sounded like a man walking a fence line. "Not since the flood." Lila held very still. A drop of something tapped inside the back room, steady as a clock. She heard her own breath in her ears. "The Verde came up in the night," Dr. Stone said. He looked out the window past her shoulder, as if he could still see it in the street. Rain-up country made a wall. The wash took cattle fences, whatever stood in the low spots. It took a house, too. He went in after them. He stopped there and let silence carry the rest. Lila saw it without wanting to. Black water where a yard should be. A man running until his lungs burned. A woman and a small boy inside a frame of light that had no door left to open. She bought the picture in her head without asking price. It would not leave her. "I did not know," she said. Her voice felt like it had been carried down from a long way. "Most do not remember anything except what is loud," the doctor said. He wrapped the quinine in paper and tied it with string. He sold off most of what he had and went up where the ground is high. Folks have their ideas about silence. They are often wrong. Lila set coins on the counter. The doctor did not look surprised at the careful stack. He slid them into a till and then added a second spool of thread to her parcel without comment. On the porch, the sun had moved bright. The blue canary sent out a stale tune through its open door. The telegraph clicked its little hammer and kept the wire awake. On the way back, she stopped at May Whitlock's shop. May looked at her face and saw what was in it. "You got news and it is heavy," May said. "I got truth," Lila said. She held May's eyes for a beat. May reached under the counter and came up with a twist of wildflowers that held their yellow like a small fire. "Take these," May said, "for the place on the shelf where dust has been sitting too long." Lila rode out of town and let the land widen again. The sky worked its way to a deeper blue. The river darkened in its bends. The dog under the steps was waiting when she reached the cabin. It sniffed her boot, and then the paper-wrapped bundle decided it was not food and returned to resting. Rowan cleaned his hands at the pump and stood a while with water running over his fingers before he looked toward her. She held the parcel like a question. "The doctor gave me history," she said. Rowan dried his hands on a rag and stared at the back of the chair by the door as if a map had been tacked there long ago and he could still read its lines. He did not sit. "I do not want to take anything from you that you did not set down yourself," Lila said. She put the flowers on the table and untied the string on the quinine with care so it could be tied again. "But I would like to know how to stand in a room with you." Rowan's jaw worked once. He looked at the window and then at the shelf where the wooden horse sat. The frame still lay face down. He crossed to it and set it upright with both hands. The glass had a bubble in one corner that warped the light. A woman and a boy looked up from their half-world. The woman wore a dress too pale for mud. The boy held the small horse that now sat on Rowan's shelf. "The water came from a place I could not see," Rowan said. He kept his eyes on the picture. "It took my house like it was nothing. I did not save them." The words were not apology. They were stone. He could not move them and did not try. Lila looked at the photograph and then at the man in front of it. "You tried," she said. "It did not matter," he said. She did not say the things people say when they want to paste a clean thought over a torn place. She stepped close enough to smell pine pitch and clean ash on his shirt. "You put your coat on my shoulders in a mean room." That mattered. Her voice went quiet at the end and held there. "You bought my name for 3 coins and gave it back to me. That mattered too." He closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them and breathed out like a man who had put down a sack and could feel the ground again. He set the frame back on the shelf and touched the edge of it with one finger. At dusk, they sat on the porch. The dog arranged itself beside the step like a guard that had been off the job too long but still knew the posture. The air lay clean and cool. Somewhere below, a cow bawled to its calf and was answered. Rowan held the harmonica he carried and did not play it. Lila leaned on the rail and let the sun move across her skin and leave. "I know how rain sounds when it is angry," Rowan said. His voice had gone soft without losing its steadiness. "Some nights I hear them in it. You do not have to feel sorry for that." "I do not," Lila said. "I feel the part that is left of it when you stand here. That is all." He turned the harmonica in his hands until the last of the light left its metal. The 2 coats touched on the single hook by the door. The windmill spoke to itself. The church bell below would not be rung until Sunday. Lila thought of the brass key in her pocket. She thought of the frame upright now and the way it changed the room's weight without changing its furniture. She thought of the dog that had decided to stay until it decided to go. Inside, she put maize flowers in a jar and set them beside the photo. Rowan watched and did not speak. The blooms threw a small yellow on the wall. It warmed the corner where a shadow had stood all day. "Thank you," he said, for what she asked. "For seeing it," he said. Night settled without a sound. The stove breathed its small heat, and the boards of the porch gave back the day's steps. Lila stood to close the window. The glass beside the table broke with a hard report. It fell inward teeth of it skittering across the floorboards. A bottle flaming at the mouth hit the sill and rolled. Fire licked out in a thin tongue and found a dry curl of wood. The dog startled and barked once into the dark like a warning thrown over a cliff. Outside hooves struck dirt and turned it loose, then moved past the porch in a rush. Voices rose out of the black raw with whiskey and pride. Rowan was already moving. He grabbed the heavy table and shoved it toward the window while he reached above the door for the rifle that had not been touched in months. Lila stamped hard on the first finger of flame. Smoke climbed the wall in a thin line and tried to take the ceiling. The wind from the open door pulled fire toward itself like breath. Rowan shoved the table hard against the window frame. Lila stamped at the first lick of flame until the bottle guttered and died. Smoke climbed in a thin ribbon and smeared the rafters. Outside, hooves thudded. Voices rose rough and eager. The dog under the steps barked until its throat rasped. Rowan reached above the door and took down the rifle. He checked the chamber by touch and slid his hat low. "Stay low," he said. "Behind the table. Keep the key in your pocket." Lila crouched with one knee on the floor and one hand on the table leg. The brass key pressed a circle into her palm through the coat. The wind pushed through the broken pane and whitened the ash in the stove. Silas Beck's voice came out of the dark yard. "Cade, you took what is mine." Rowan stepped to the porch. He did not hurry. He stood just outside the door so the firelight did not throw him clean. Torches burned along the fence like eyes. 6 riders. Silas sat forward in the saddle with his reins tight mouth wet with whiskey. "You sold your kin," Rowan said. "You counted my coins." 3 silver for blood," Silas said. "That was a joke." The room laughed. "I am done laughing." "You named a price," Rowan said. "You took it." "You stole a thing I could sell again," Silas said. "Bring her out." Lila's fingers dug into the table edge. She could see the line of Rowan's shoulder the way it squared and held. The dog pressed against the joist and showed its teeth at the open yard. A torch swung and dropped a sheet of light over Rowan's boots. A man on Silas's left lifted his rifle a little for the comfort of it. Another spat and grinned. The windmill turned and squeaked as if it were afraid to make a louder sound. "Ride off," Rowan said. "There is nothing here for you." Silas smiled without humor. He raised his hand. The first shot cracked. The porch rail jumped a splinter into the air. Rowan moved without flinch and fired toward the dirt in front of Silas's horse. The animal reared with a scream and banged its forefeet together. 2 more shots came wide and tore bark from the juniper at the yard edge. Pain flashed through Rowan's arm. He staggered back a step and gripped his sleeve where a hot line had cut through the muscle just above the elbow. Blood ran black in the porch light and then red when it found the edge of his hand. Rowan, Lila cried. It was the first time she said his name, like calling him back from a place. He set his teeth and put a second round into the ground between the two men on the right. Their horses danced sideways, and one lost his seat for a breath. A torch fell and rolled and caught dry grass. Fire ran along the fence and then hit green and stopped. Smoke moved low across the ground as if it did not know which way the wind would go. Silas yanked his horse around and swore at his men. "Fall back," he spat. "You hear me." He turned at the gate and threw his voice behind him. "You think this is done." The words hit the cabin wall and slid off. Hoofbeats thinned and then were only dust. The yard held the sound of the wind again and a small ticking from the stove. Rowan leaned one shoulder on the door jamb. He kept his good hand on the rifle and his eyes on the dark until the last echo died. Lila ran to him with a strip of cloth ripped from a clean rag. "Sit," she said. She did not wait for his yes. She pulled the chair to the door and pushed his shoulder until he took it. Her fingers were sure on the knot as she wound linen above the hole and cinched it until the blood slowed. He hissed once and then was quiet. "You should have stayed behind the table," he said. "You should have let me stand beside you," she said. He looked at her for the first time since the glass broke. He saw streaks of soot on her cheekbone and a lash of smoke in her hair where a spark had gone out. He saw the key print on her palm. He set the rifle across his knees and breathed. They put the smoking chunks outside and doused them with water from the barrel. Lila hauled bucket after bucket, bracing her back against the weight. Rowan used his right hand to pull the wet burlap across the sill where the glass had cut away. The dog nosed the ash and sneezed. By first light, the edge of the sky had gone pale. Rowan's skin was fevered under Lila's palm. She looked down the slope toward the barn and then at the empty road. She did not ask. She moved. They made a pallet in the barn on a stack of grain sacks and 2 horse blankets. The air smelled of hay and iron. Swallows traced a line under the rafters and scolded. Rowan lay back and closed his eyes while Lila kept the cloth wet with water from a pail. When his breath began to climb, she slid the stall door wide and watched the grade for a rider. Dr. Abram Stone came up the lane with his bag and a face that had not slept. He took in the burned grass, the broken pane, the chair by the door. He asked no questions that slowed his hands. "Hold the light steady," he told Lila. He cut the sleeve and cleaned the wound. The needle bit the edge of torn flesh and pulled it neat. Rowan's jaw set. Sweat ran from his temple to his neck. Lila held the lantern until her arm shook. The dog lay with its chin on its paws and did not move. "He keeps his blood," the doctor said. "You did right with the pressure." He tied the last stitch and wrapped clean bandage over the arm. "Keep him still. No strain." "Thank you," Lila said. Dr. Stone nodded once. "I heard riders on the road before dawn," he said. "Sheriff Hale will be working a line." He set his hat back on. "You have water. Keep food simple. He will do." When the sound of the doctor's horse faded down the grade, the barn went quiet except for the easy sound of animals working hay. Lila sat back on her heels and let her hands find Rowan's, then pulled back and folded them in her lap. The lantern threw slow light over the rafters. "Lila," Rowan said. His voice was rough and low. "I need to say a thing you can carry." She leaned forward before she meant to. "I bought your name," he said, "not your body." He looked at the ceiling and then at her. "You are free. You can leave. I will not hold you with what I did." The words landed without apology and without demand. They made a clear space in the barn that had not existed a moment before. Lila stared at him. Her throat tightened and then eased. The plank under her knee creaked. A drop from the pump outside hit the trough and then another. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand and left a smear she did not clean. "Why did you care enough to do it?" she asked. He closed his eyes and opened them. "Because someone cared for me once when I did not deserve it," he said. "Because I know what it is to lose a house full of names and be left with only one." She put her hand on the bandage and felt the heat still there. "Then rest," she said. "I will keep the fire small." Before dawn, when the sky was only the idea of light, Rowan slept with his bad arm across his chest. Lila stood in the doorway with the air on her face and a weight in her pocket that felt like more than brass. She went inside the cabin and wrote on a scrap of paper in a small, careful hand. "Thank you for my life. I cannot pay this back." She set the note on the table beside the lantern and packed a bundle no bigger than a loaf. She pulled on her boots and lifted the latch. The porch board spoke under her feet. The dog opened one eye, then two. It watched her the way a night watchman clocks a change of guard. Lila stepped into the blue of early day and picked up the bundle. "Lila," Rowan said. She turned. His shirt was buttoned wrong and his hair lay in a rough line over his forehead. He held the door frame with his good hand. He was too pale. "I did not mean to wake you," she said. "You are leaving. I owe you too much," she said. The words came like stones. "Kindness is a debt I do not know how to carry." He came down 2 steps and stopped on the last, then went to one knee in the dust. He did it slow, not for show, but because there was only one way to meet her where she stood. "I am not asking you to pay me," he said. "I'm asking you to stay because this place is not a place without you." Her breath broke and found itself again. She dropped the bundle. The dog flinched and then relaxed. She stood with her hands open and did not know where to put them. "I thought love was a hand that closed," she said. "I do not know the other kind." "We can learn it," Rowan said. He was not a man who begged, and he was begging with his eyes and not with his mouth. Something inside Lila rose from a deep room. It came out of her with a sound that was not fear. The scream lifted and rolled over the clearing, clean and sharp. Swallows lifted off the beam and circled once and settled again. The wind carried the last of it away toward the wash. She dropped to her knees in front of him and took his face in her hands. "I do not know how to love right," she said. "Then we will learn together," he said. His voice was hoarse and steady at once. She put his hand flat against her chest and held it there. He rose with her slowly. He lifted her bundle with his right hand and set it inside the door. He closed the latch with care, as if it were fragile and could crack from a hard touch. Sheriff Maddox Hale rode up the lane with 2 men from town as the sun cleared the far ridge. He swung out of the saddle and took in the scorched patch by the fence and the board over the window. He touched the brim of his hat to Lila first. "I heard enough to know who shot and who stood," he said. "We have tracks and names." Rowan nodded. He did not ask questions. He stood straight and kept his bad arm still. Maddox looked at the dog under the step. It thumped its tail against the joist once and quit. He looked back at the 2 people on the porch and let the quiet sit between them for a beat. "I will write what needs writing," he said. "You keep your door shut if trouble tries to learn its way back up here." He turned his horse and went down the grade. The wind shifted and brought the smell of wet rock from far off. Lila watched the sheriff until the dust settled. Rowan leaned his shoulder against the post and let the porch take some of his weight. Inside the house held the line of light that slipped past the board over the broken pane. It struck the shelf where the wooden horse stood next to a jar of yellow flowers. The frame beside them did not bend the faces anymore. It simply held them. Outside, the windmill turned once and squeaked and fell quiet. In the town below, a bell struck 3 slow notes and stopped. Copper Bend woke in a softer tone. The street dust lay quiet. The Blue Canary's piano kept its mouth shut. Delia Hart stood on a chair and wiped the saloon's glass with long, sure strokes. She did not look toward the corners where the worst nights lived. She worked until the window showed the street like a clean plate. Rowan and Lila rode down together side by side. The mare's ears flicked toward the smithy, then toward the depot. The telegraph key clicked once and rested. Sheriff Maddox Hale stood in front of his office with a sheet of paper in his hand and a tack between his teeth. He pressed the notice onto the board with the heel of his palm. The paper shivered in the small wind and settled. Silas Beck's name stood there in the sheriff's plain hand. Trespass to be charged, to be removed from the county line. Maddox caught their eyes and gave a short nod. He did not need to explain the law he had already put to work. Lila tipped her chin a fraction. Rowan kept his hands easy on the reins. May Whitlock met them at her shop with a bundle of wildflowers tied with blue thread. "Yellow for a room that should have it," she said, and slid the blooms into Lila's hands before Lila could open her mouth to protest. "Thank you," Lila said. The flowers smelled like a warm field. Reverend Ezra Merritt stood on the church steps with a broom. He did not talk at them. He tipped the broom and let them pass the way a man opens a gate for travelers already on their way. At the general store, the keeper counted out sugar and coffee and a small sack of nails. He did not stare. He put a peppermint on the counter without comment. Lila left it there and smiled without showing teeth. A girl in a calico dress peered from behind a bolt of cloth and whispered to her mother. Her mother did not pull her back. She let the girl look and learn the shape of quiet people. On the ride home, the sky wore a thin veil where rain might be. The mesa took them back with the same clean climb as always. The dog came out from under the porch and circled their boots, once pleased to see what it had decided were its people. Rowan dropped the sack of nails on the table and stepped to his workbench. He set 3 Liberty half-dollars on the plank and looked at them for a breath. He drilled each coin with the point of a small awl, slow and careful so the metal would not crack. He threaded leather through each hole and tied the thongs to a strip of juniper he had smoothed by hand. He checked how the coins hung. When the breeze came through the door, they touched and chimed in 3 clean notes. The sound ran across the porch and into the yard and did not disappear. It lived there. Lila watched with her chin in her palm. The coat she had worn since that first night hung beside Rowan's on the same hook. Their sleeves touched and stayed. She took May's flowers and set them in a jar on the shelf beside the wooden horse. She wiped the dust off the small horse with the edge of a cloth and set it straight so the boy in the photograph would find it with his eyes. Rowan saw her touch the frame without flinching. The room changed its weight. Afternoon laid a warm hand on the boards. Rowan sat with the saddle in his lap and rubbed oil into the leather in small circles until it shone. Lila brought coffee to the porch and set his cup beside his boot. The dog slept with its ribs lifting slow head on its paws. The windmill turned once and gave a single friendly squeak as if it remembered another voice and copied it. Cloud shadow crossed the mesa. A cool breath came ahead of the rain. The first drops were fat and spaced wide. They hit the porch rail and left dark coins that spread and met. Rowan stood in the doorway and listened. His shoulders lifted once and then eased. He did not move back. He let the sound write its old message, and then another quieter one on top of it. Lila opened the door wide and hooked it. The smell of wet dust rose like a promise without words. She laid her palm flat on the door wood. The brass key hung inside on a nail polished bright where it had rubbed. She could close the door. She did not need to. Rowan stepped past her and let rain find his hands. He turned his palms up and watched water bead on the scar at his jaw. Lila tilted her face to the sky and blinked, then laughed the smallest laugh, surprised at the sound of herself. The 3 coins sang when the wind reached them. Ting, ting, ting. "Does it hurt?" she asked, and meant the rain. "Not anymore," he said. He tucked a wet curl behind her ear with his right hand. "It is only water." They ate simple in the last light, bread and beans and coffee that had gone soft in the pot. Lila touched the edge of the photograph and then the jar. The flowers filled the corner with their small sun. The dog dreamed and ran in place on the planks with a soft huff. The bell in town carried up 3 slow strokes and rested. The sound reached the porch and settled with the scent of pine smoke. Lila leaned against the post and looked out where the land fell away to the river, where the tracks drew a black line through the dust. The rail did not sing. It waited for some other hour to do its work. Rowan lifted the strip of juniper and fixed it to the porch beam with 2 square nails. He pulled each knot and checked each thong. He stepped back to see the coins in their new home. The breeze brought them to each other again. The sound cut clean through the soft rain and went somewhere both of them could hear. He came to stand beside her. The porch board under their feet remembered every step that had carried them to this place, and every step that would leave the same marks no matter how carefully they walked. "You are not 3 coins, Rowan said. He said it the way a man names weather and expects no argument. Lila looked at him full. "I am Lila Brooks," she said. He nodded. That was enough. He took her hand, and they stood for a while with their coffee cooling on the rail. The rain eased and slid away. The windmill turned without complaint. In the yard, the dog found a dry spot and curled tight. Inside the cabin held its warm square of light. The coats on the hook touched at the shoulders. The brass key hung where anyone could see it. The coins above them gave a last bright note and went still. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.